Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha. I'm a reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Block. On tonight's show, we are doing our first non-Lakers post-game reaction of the season. The San Antonio Spurs and New York Knicks just played in the NBA Cup Championship, and I thought of no better game to debut my first post-game reaction. The Knicks won 124-113. They are NBA Cup champions. They are the third winner of the NBA Cup. The Lakers winning in 2023, the Milwaukee Bucks winning in 2024. And I thought in line with this probably being best NBA Cup to date, in my opinion. This was a high-level matchup between these two teams. This felt like Game 5 of a first-round or second-round series. There were a combined 41 offensive rebounds, which is like typical of a Game 6 or a Game 7, just an absolute dogfight between these two teams. And despite, in my opinion, San Antonio being the better team for most of the evening, New York rallied with an epic fourth quarter comeback, outscoring them 35-19 to win this 124-113. Now, technically, none of these stats are going to count for either side. The win does not count. Loss does not count. So both teams remain 18-7 and will play technically an 83rd regular season game. But wanted to give a big shout out to the chat. Big shout out to the late night gang. And let's get into the post-game reaction. So we're going to stick with the usual format here. Going to try and keep it a little bit shorter, then get into some Q&A. Buha's big picture is this game, to me, affirmed and really reaffirmed that both of these teams are contenders, in my opinion. For the Knicks, I think they are the best team in the East and should be the favorite to come out of the East. I think coming into the season, they were right there with Cleveland. Cleveland has had a subpar start to the season and is looking like a team that's going to have to scrap their way into home court advantage. But the Knicks are right there just behind Detroit as the number 2 seed in the East. I think they are the best and most complete team in the East. I would pick them against anybody else in the East with or without home court advantage right now. And I think we saw why tonight. And I'm going to get into the bench a little bit more in my specific takeaways. But tonight, OG Anunoby, I thought, was the best player on the floor. 28 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block. You just the cutting, the contested threes, the offensive rebounds, defending Fox and Castle and Harper, even defending Wemby a little bit, like just a complete two-way performance from OG Anunoby. And I get why Jalen Brunson was named the NBA Cup MVP and deservedly so. OG Anunoby was better tonight and more impactful tonight. And now over the course of the Knicks run, I think if you look at that, Brunson obviously deserves it. But for tonight specifically, I thought OG was the best player on the floor for the Knicks and arguably the best player on the floor, period. But he has his performance. Cat makes some timely plays, didn't have a good game, I would say. And they're clearly better with Mitchell Robinson on the floor compared to Cat. But Cat did have some big shots, a couple of big drives. Josh Hart just doing Josh Hart things. And Mikal Bridges ended up not playing much in the fourth due to injury, or I think he didn't play after whenever he exited in the third. So his minutes got cut a little short. Brunson 25, 4 and 8, 11 and 27 shooting. But just like Jordan Clarkson, Tyler Kolek, Mitchell Robinson, like those were the guys who really led this like late third, early fourth turnaround for the Knicks, and real big part of them winning this game and winning the fourth so decisively, 35-19. On the San Antonio side, like I was getting the tweet ready of if the Spurs won this game, which again it was looking like through 3 quarters, they entered with I think they were up 94-89 going into the fourth, and had been flirting with like an 8 to 12 point lead at various points of the first half and third quarter. And to me, just again, through the first 3 quarters, like we're decisively the better team, in my opinion, before they went ice cold in the fourth and really struggled in terms of their execution in the fourth. But I was getting the tweet ready for San Antonio to say, like, they whooped the Lakers, they beat the Thunder, and if they beat the Knicks and win the NBA Cup, like that is, in my opinion, that would have been the most impressive 3-game stretch any team has had this season. And then you also factor in no Wemby against the Lakers and then Wemby on minutes restriction against the Thunder and the Knicks. Like that, I mean, Wemby had a weird game. He had an incredible third quarter and then was pedestrian outside of that and struggled a bit in the fourth. And really like what was a big part of New York's run, because in him leaving the rim and him leaving the paint at times, trying to contest and chase blocks, that was allowing Mitchell Robinson to just park himself in the middle of the floor and collect 10 offensive rebounds. I believe the Knicks had 11 or 12 offensive rebounds in the fourth quarter. The individual box score on NBA.com isn't ready yet, but just like that was a big part of the New York game plan. Was it almost stopped being like, can we generate the best shot in the fourth quarter? It was almost like, let's just get a shot up and we're going to corral the offensive rebound. And like they just dominated the offensive glass, and San Antonio dominated the offensive glass through the first 3 quarters, and then they went ice cold and no longer could grab an offensive rebound, or I think that a couple in the fourth. But that was really the swing factor, was the possession game. New York took 6 more shots. Spurs took 7 more free throws, but even looking at the turnovers, like 10-8 in favor of the Spurs, like it just, Knicks controlled the offensive glass, and that really swung this game. But I think both of these teams are legit. I had them, I believe, 4th and 6th respectively in my contender rankings. If you wanted to move the Spurs up, I wouldn't blame you. Like I think we saw some of the limitations with San Antonio tonight in terms of, I don't want to say like the ability to win a big game, because they just beat the Thunder in the semifinals. And I think that would be disingenuous to overlook that and diminish that. But certainly there's still a bit of a learning curve for this group in terms of they have not been on a playoff run together, right? Most of these guys have not even been in the playoffs, or at least some of the key guys, looking at a Castle and a Harper. Fox has been there one time. Wemby's not been there yet. So these guys are still learning, right? And I think for them, like, this is the next step in their evolution, and they need more reps like this, right? But Stephon Castle, I'm going to touch on him in a second because I think he's making a real star turn. But Wemby had 18 off the bench. Dylan Harper had 21. He shot the ball really well. But Spurs just went cold at the wrong time, then couldn't grab a defensive rebound. Knicks dominated the offensive glass, made a bunch of big threes, a bunch of big just shots and plays in the fourth quarter. In terms of notable performers, already mentioned OG Anunoby. I thought he was probably the best player on the floor tonight. Cat had 16 and 11. Brunson, 25, 4 and 8 again. Bridges had 11. Josh Hart had 11 and 8 rebounds. Mitchell Robinson, 4 points, 15 rebounds, 1 steal, and 2 blocks in 18 minutes. Those were incredibly impactful 18 minutes. Like that was, I would put it up there with like one of the best bench performances by any backup center this season. Mitchell Robinson does do this, but like given the stakes, given the opponent of Luke Cornett and Victor Wembanyama are 2 of the best rim protectors in the NBA. Those are obviously 2 giant dudes. Mitchell Robinson was able to push both of them around at times and really just stick out his shoulders and his elbows and take space in the paint and just dominate the way that only Mitchell Robinson and maybe Steven Adams can do. Jordan Clarkson hit a bunch of big shots to not have an efficient night, 6 for 15, but all of his threes were huge momentum shots and had a couple of nice drives. And then even defensively, a steal and a block for Clarkson. Like, he was making some big plays defensively. And then Tyler Kolek, 14 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds. He was huge. down the stretch as a secondary playmaker and someone who could keep the ball moving, keep the offense humming, and then also pressuring the ball full court. He made some big shots and big plays as well. So Knicks got a lot from their bench. And then on the San Antonio side, Harrison Barnes, 11 points, Luke Cornett, 14 and 6. He killed them inside, but he just ultimately didn't play that much as they were splitting the time. It was kind of a weird thing where you could argue the non-star big man outplayed their star counterpart, where I thought Luke Cornett was a bit more effective than Wemby tonight, and Mitchell Robinson was more effective than Cat. But obviously Cat and Wemby were going to get a certain amount of time. De'Aaron Fox, 16 and 9, but had 5 turnovers, and I thought was a bit too sloppy and careless with the ball. Devin Vassell, 12 points, 5 rebounds, had a hot start and then cooled off, finished 4 for 14. Stephon Castle, I don't think the numbers do him justice. 15, 7, and 12. I thought he was by far the best Spur tonight. And his motor, he had 4 offensive rebounds, and just his pressure against, like, the Knicks did not want to run offense against Stephon Castle. Their entire offensive game plan was get Castle switched off of Jalen Brunson. And I just thought, like, Castle, again, I'm going to touch on him in a second, but like, he's making a real leap right now in front of our eyes as a second-year player that is just, I think, whatever your expectations or thoughts of Castle were, I think these last 3 performances against the Lakers, Thunder, and Knicks, in my opinion, are vaulting him to a different level, a different stratosphere, and where people were eager to throw him in hypothetical Giannis trades, I would not do that, like, at all. I would not consider putting Stephon Castle in a Giannis deal. Like, this dude is too good. And I honestly think there's a conversation to be had about, like, Castle versus Harper long term. I think a lot of people are putting Harper ahead of Castle. I'm not, like, I get it. I just think I'm really, really high on Castle. He's become one of my favorite players in the league to watch, and just the way that he defends, the way that he crashes the offensive glass, the way that he cuts and attacks the rim with force, and then also the playmaking leap that he's making right now. He's just incredible and really fun to watch. Off the bench, Keldon Johnson had an impact early, but then was pretty quiet the rest of the way. Same thing. Julian Champagnie just never really got, like, he's another guy, struggled with his shot, 1 for 5, 1 for 4 on threes, but like, he's another guy who, to me, can be a bit of a bellwether for the Spurs offense in terms of when he's getting a bunch of open looks, when he's getting a bunch of shots, that's probably because the ball is moving, it's snapping, and he's one of those weak side shooters for them that is so dangerous. But him only getting 5 shots in 25 minutes, that shows to some degree some of the limitations or some of the things that the Spurs were battling offensively. Then Wemby, 18 points, 6 rebounds, a steal on a block off the bench, just 7 for 17 from the floor, 2 for 6 on threes. Never quite got, like, incredible third quarter, right? He had the 2 lobs, he had a couple threes, he had the pull-up midi. But outside of that, I believe that was 5 of his 7 shots came in or 5 of his 7 makes came in the third quarter. And for the other 3 quarters, like, came out of the gate pressing a bit late in the first. And, he had a lob attempt that he kind of, like, threw off the backboard. And it's understandable based on how much time he missed 12 games. And he did look much better against the Thunder. But when a guy returns, there can be, like, an up and down nature to the process. He's also in a weird role right now as a bench big and playing these, like, short bursts where they're being very cautious with his minutes and how long he's out there for. So he's only out there for like 4 to 5 minutes basically. And then, he's playing these shorter shifts. And then Dylan Harper, I thought, didn't have an assist, but 21 and 7, hit 5 threes and was incredible defensively. So I'm just really high on both of these teams. I think the Spurs, to me, they're still the OKC's on their own tier. Denver and Houston, from a statistical profile standpoint, are on their own tier in the West. But I think, just like I've included the Lakers in that conversation, I think the Spurs deserve to be in that conversation as well. And, like, I think you can make a strong case, and I've been making this case for the past week plus, that I think 5 of the top 6 teams in the NBA right now are in the West. And I'm including the Spurs in that group. For the Knicks, I think they're the clear East favorites, and I'm not saying they're unbeatable by any means. Like I think Detroit, we saw that first round series last year. I think this would be a fun second or third round matchup. I think Cleveland versus New York would be interesting, especially assuming like Cleveland can get healthy, get right, get some momentum going into the playoffs. That should be a heavyweight battle. And then New York, Orlando, they're 2-2 already. They played 4 times this season. That's been a really fun matchup between those two sides. So I think the Knicks are beatable. My point is, I just think looking at them compared to the rest of the East, it's not an OKC versus the rest of the field type situation, but it is just like from top to bottom, or 1 through 7, 1 through 8, 1 through 9. I just really like this group. And I think compared to Detroit, compared to Cleveland, compared to Orlando, compared to Boston, maybe Boston, if Tatum comes back and like that's a different conversation. But compared to Atlanta, compared to whoever else you want to throw in there in the East, I just think that the Knicks are better. In terms of stat of the night, I mentioned it at the top, but 41 combined offensive rebounds. That off the top of my head, like has to be one of the higher marks of the season, if not a season high. I would assume. I would assume there's not many games where two teams both have 18 plus offensive rebounds. And then a big shout out to Mitchell Robinson with his 10 offensive rebounds, just an absurd number. In terms of my 3 takeaways, takeaway number 1 is I think the biggest difference between the Knicks this season versus last year's group is both the bench, but also the trust in the bench from Mike Brown. And now, famously, we know Tom Thibodeau was not a guy who liked going to his bench. He liked relying on his starters, maybe a 6th man, maybe a 7th man if he was really in a good mood, wanted to extend it to like 7 dudes. But he rarely went beyond like 7 players as like rotation mainstays in the playoffs in big moments. And this has been a thing now for over a decade of him running his players into the ground in like a literal sense, where like certain guys have had their careers altered by playing under Tibbs, but I think more so maximizing guys in the regular season. Like I think Tibbs was a real floor raiser in the regular season, but we did see diminishing returns in the playoffs with his groups, where that like we're gonna play the 4, like, he approached every game like JJ Redick approached game 4 against Minnesota. Like that was Tom Thibodeau every single night. And I think at some point that would catch up to his teams later in the season. There still is a little bit of that dynamic with this group just because their starting 5 is so good. And there clearly is a gap between like their starters and their bench. But Mitchell Robinson, to me, was their best big man tonight. Jordan Clarkson made several big plays on both sides of the ball, more so offensively, but Jordan Clarkson had some big moments. And with Mikal Bridges dealing with, again, I'm not quite sure what he was dealing with specifically, but I know he was injured, didn't play, I believe, in the full 4th quarter. Like Clarkson was out there for some big stretches, some big moments. Tyler Kolek then replaced Clarkson and closed the game. He was awesome tonight. And then going into like Yabusele, I don't think has really played up to expectations, but he has had moments in, I thought was really solid last year with Philly. Then you go to like Landry Shamet is injured right now, Miles McBride. So this all of a sudden is a group that can go 9 to 10 deep, depending on the night, depending on the matchup, and not only go 9 to 10 deep, but have the trust of the coaching staff to be deployed. Like they went pretty deep, and Cat was dealing with also something where he was having his leg worked on, but they went pretty deep into the 4th with Mitchell Robinson. And again, they played pretty much the entire 4th with Clarkson and or Kolek out there. Like that, to me, just shows the difference, in my opinion, between this Knicks group and last year's group. There's also some differences in terms of the offense, and they are trying to rely more on the playmaking of Bridges and Towns. Towns had that incredible find to Anunoby where he's doubled, looks like he's about to be stripped, and then he just fires this ricocheting laser that warps around multiple defenders and goes right to Anunoby. But I just think that this Knicks team, like the starting group is their strength, of course, and that is one of the best units in the NBA. But going into the bench, they have uncovered, like Clarkson has helped as a bench scorer. Kolek has been a find for that front office. Landry Shamet has given them some good minutes. Miles McBride is one of the better bench guards in the league. This is a really solid, like 9 to 10 man rotation. And again, their coach also is trusting in them and pushing the right buttons. So despite like this was this is as close to a playoff game as you get early in the season. I think that's one of the beautiful things with the NBA Cup right now is that like playoff like atmosphere that comes with it. And again, there were some injuries on the New York side, but I thought Mike Brown pushed a lot of the right buttons and the bench guys delivered. The bench guys swung this game from the end of the third quarter, making that little run to I think it was around 10 or 12, and they got it to 5 going into the fourth, and then continued that run, and it just snowballed from there into New York winning this game by double figures. Takeaway number 2 is Stephon Castle's star turn, and looking at the last 3 games against the Lakers, the Thunder, and tonight against the Knicks, and those are 3 games since he returned from his injury absence with I believe it was a calf injury. 22.3 points, 7.7 rebounds, 6.7 assists. He is defending at an all defense level right now. I thought the job he did against Luka, the job he did against Shea, the job he did tonight against Brunson, he is locking down and really bothering. Like those are arguably the 3 best isolation scorers in the NBA in Luka, Shea, and Brunson. And Stephon Castle was playing some of the best defense I've seen against those guys this season. And he's a complete player. He can score at all 3 levels. Of course, the jumper is still in development right now. And tonight had a rough offensive performance from a scoring perspective, but made up for it with 12 assists and only 2 turnovers, and did have the 1 turnover late that was costly. But you take a 6-to-1 assist to turnover ratio any night for a guy that is still in his second season and learning. So again, I think Stephon Castle is making a real star turn right now, a real leap. And to me, he looks like a guy who, I'm going to talk a little crazy, but like he looks like a guy that could be a 3rd-team All-NBA guy at some point here in the next few years. And I don't know that people were necessarily viewing him in that light, or, I think again, if we're ranking like the Spurs young core, it's clearly like Wemby's in a different stratosphere, right? An all-time stratosphere. And then Dylan Harper as the number 2 pick. And Dylan Harper's really good. I really like Dylan Harper as well. He's looking like, a future all-star, potential all-NBA guy. I was talking to Jared Weiss, my buddy who covers the Spurs, used to cover the Celtics. And I was asking him about Harper versus Castle, and he's on the side of Harper having the higher upside and being like the better long-term prospect. But he was saying that Harper kind of looks like a little bit of a slower SGA, and that he thinks like he has MVP potential and like 1st-team All-NBA potential. And so I'm not going to argue with that against someone who's been watching Harper on a daily basis for the last going on almost 3 months. But I think Castle's really special. And I do think one thing he is ahead of Harper, and I think will continue to be ahead of him, is the motor and the defense, right? Like I think Harper has a high motor as well. And he had that really big defensive stop against Brunson where he forced the backcourt violation. And really like, I thought there was a night and day difference in how Brunson looked against Castle and Harper versus anyone else on the Spurs. When it was Fox or Vassell or Champagny, or he cooked Harrison Barnes a few times, like they were trying to spam attacking Harrison Barnes. He was able to create separation. He was able to get his little runners and floaters and step backs up. When it was Castle and Harper, he had a really tough time because those guys are quick and athletic and strong and have really good defensive fundamentals. So to bring it back to Castle, like I just think this dude is leveling up right now in a way that if I was anyone else other than OKC, because I think OKC continues to be in their own like stratosphere. If I'm Denver, if I'm Houston, and I'm the Lakers, I'm looking at the leap that Stephon Castle is making right now. And like, if that continues, as it very well could and probably should, based on him being a second year player, like, I'm just thinking about what this dude is going to look like in March and April. And that's a pretty scary sight, assuming he can stay healthy. But I think one of the bright spots here over this 3-game stretch, other than the Spurs going 2-1 and holding their own for the most part against, in my opinion, 3 of the top 5 teams in the NBA, Stephon Castle was legit. He bothered, in my opinion, the 3 best ISO scorers in the game right now. And I think he's looking like a really special player that, if I'm the Spurs, I do not consider putting in any honest talks moving forward. And then final thing from me before we get into the Q&A is the reintegrating Wemby process. And it was a much cleaner process against the Thunder, and he was much more impactful against the Thunder. I believe friend of the show, Jason Timpf, tracked it, and the Thunder only attempted 3 shots at the rim with Wemby on the floor. And tonight, you see the difference when Wemby's out there in terms of there's almost like a 6-foot barrier around the rim where people are settling for mid-range jumpers, they're settling for floaters, they're settling for runners. They are not trying Wemby in the sense of like, let me try and see if I could get a layup over this guy or like a point blank floater. The way they tried him was Mitchell Robinson, then again, taking up space and doing Mitchell Robinson things on the offensive glass. And he was able to be effective. Now, a lot of it was not Mitchell Robinson, like putbacks and stuff, right? He only had 4 points. He only had 2 field goals, but it then led to Mitchell Robinson kickouts. He had a couple of assists. Or then getting the Spurs in the blender, getting the Spurs in rotation, and then attacking out of that or hitting threes out of that. So that was the one way they attacked Wemby. But I think right now it's interesting, or the Spurs are in an interesting spot because they had to adjust how they played without Wemby, and they were successful. They went 9-3, and they were not only without Wemby for most of that stretch, they were without Stephon Castle for most of that stretch. And De'Aaron Fox got into a certain rhythm. I think Devin Vassell was in a certain rhythm. Dylan Harper was also injured for part of that, but he came back and has been in a certain rhythm. And it feels like they have like just a certain rhythm and flow offensively right now. And I think that carried, like, Stephon Castle has kind of amplified that, and they carried that into the Lakers game. I think they carried it into the Thunder game. And I think they partly carried that into tonight. But you do see a difference when Wemby is out there and the way that the offense functions. And there were some times it was like, obviously, like, shot making aside, because I don't want to just base it off of are the shots going in or not. I am basing it more off of shot quality and just like how the offense is functioning. There was like, when it's pick and pop or pick and roll for lobs and for threes, I think that is a seamless integration, right? But there were a lot more ISOs around the elbows, around the top of the key. And that I thought, in a way, like, especially in that third quarter, for as great as he was and as awesome as that stretch was, it did feel like it kind of took the rest of the group out of a rhythm. And then once they tried shifting back to the more egalitarian style of offense that they've been running, they just weren't quite able to recapture that momentum that they had through the first like 2.5 or so quarters. So I think this is a bit of a learning lesson for them in general in terms of like how to close a game in a big moment. I think this is going to be a teaching point for a pretty young group for the most part, outside of like Harrison Barnes. But I also think right now that they're dealing with like a real interesting reintegration here with Wemby, because he's their best player, right? Clearly. And like, he's a top 10 player in the NBA. And I'm not going to say they're like worse with Wemby or there are, like it was rough at times tonight, but I think like looking at the big picture, I think they have to figure this is on Mitch Johnson to figure out what's the best way to, I think, function the way they've been functioning offensively and incorporating Wemby into that more seamlessly. And again, I thought it looked much better against the Thunder than it did tonight. So you have a couple of examples of it looking one way versus it looking another way. But I just, I think that's the challenge for them in the short term. Longer term, I think they're going to be fine. Again, I think they are a back end contender right now, which is ahead of schedule. But this is a really fun team. This was a really fun game. And I think this was probably the best and most entertaining NBA Cup yet. And of course, it's still in its infancy. It's only year 3, but I had a lot of fun watching this tournament, and I'm looking forward to future seasons. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. First one from Nala. Spurs feature bright, elite defense, but offense can really stall when physicality increases. They need their own version of J-Dub, bigger, versatile wing. I'm glad you mentioned that because that had been one of the things I wanted to touch on earlier, especially with the Mitchell Robinson point. But one of the things that really stood out, and this is where I think I think this is something for the Lakers to try to take advantage of when they play the Spurs in the future. This is something OKC, I think, could potentially take advantage of. And this is certainly something I think Denver and Houston could take advantage of. But we saw there are some limitations to the Spurs perimeter group in terms of, if you just look at, put the 2 centers aside, and that's a big aside because those are 2 huge dudes. From Fox, Vassell, Castle, Barnes, Johnson, Champagnie, all those dudes are between Fox is about 6'2", 6'3". So we'll be generous here and say 6'3". All those guys are between 6'3" and 6'7". Barnes is kind of on 6'7", 6'8" range, but Barnes is morphed into being more of a 4 over the last half decade. Keldon Johnson is a big dude for his size, and all these dudes play with a certain level of motor and physicality that I think is real and is a part of their DNA. However, there is a size component here where OG Anunoby is, when you factor in his size with his motor, it's really tough for them to match up with an OG Anunoby. It's really tough for them to match up with even a Josh Hart, who has a certain level of motor and strength and just energy. And then looking at Mitchell Robinson, any of those guys matched up with Mitchell Robinson, especially if Cornette or Wemby are being dragged out of the action, Mitchell Robinson is just going to bulldoze all those dudes. So I think there is if there's one thing I would add, if I'm the Spurs, I mean, of course you would love to add a J-Dub type. I think you're talking more the player archetype or that the size component there. But I think I would also throw out an Aaron Gordon type. If they had if Aaron Gordon replaced Harrison Barnes, I mean, of course that's a giant jump up in terms of talent and skill and production. But if a player, even if it was a Harrison Barnes level player, but Aaron Gordon's body type, that's I think the type of guy. I think they need more of a power 4 that's a little bit bigger and stronger than Barnes and Johnson. And again, if they could get a J-Dub level guy, of course, but there's not very many guys that check that box, and that probably requires you making some type of move and trading someone else. So I'm with you though. I think if an interesting guy that comes to mind is depending on what the Clippers end up doing, I think a John Collins type is kind of interesting. Now he's not had the best season, and I don't know, he might be a little bit too offensive minded to disrupt what the Spurs have going on, but just someone of that ilk. I think they need that big athletic 3.5/4 that I think is a little bit better than Johnson and Barnes. I think that's the weak spot in the rotation right now. Because 1 through 3, I love Fox and Castle and Vassell and Harper. And even Champagnie, if Champagnie's your fifth wing right now, or, fifth perimeter guy, I think that's fine. Like, I thought he did a solid job against Luka. I even thought he did a solid job against Brunson, but there was a real difference there between Castle and Harper compared to Champagnie. But yeah, I mean, I just think the Spurs team is really good, and they, to me, are like the classic team that's like they're probably going to win. They're either going to have a really competitive first round series, especially if they're in that 4-5 matchup, or potentially win a series and then probably lose. Like, I think they're going to lose in the first or second round in competitive fashion, and that'll be like the launching point to future success. Like, this is the Thunder 2 years ago when the Thunder went first round, second round title. We'll see if San Antonio could be even more ahead of schedule and maybe be a second round team, but they're right there. And I think this team's legit. Kennedy says Wemby left OG wide open for the dagger three. Yeah, Wemby had a really rough fourth quarter. I guess I'm typically on the side of I do give players a bit of grace coming off of injury, and I know he had already played one game. But, also just the minutes restriction and the weird rhythm with his rotation, I thought, stood out. But yeah, it was not just that. It was some of the shot selection. I thought it was giving up. I mean, he was on the receiving end of a lot of those Mitchell Robinson offensive rebounds. So yeah, it was not a good fourth quarter for Wemby. Legacy says it'll be a very good Western Conference Finals between OKC and the Spurs or Nuggets for sure. I mean, I think at this point I would go OKC and Denver for Western Conference Finals, but Spurs could certainly make it. You guys got any other questions here? Boji says a good Cinderella story for the Knicks, especially with the ceiling they have. Yeah, I mean, look, I think I had the Knicks fourth in my contender rankings, but a big part of that was because I view them as the clear contender in the East. So, for example, I had the Knicks ahead of the Lakers and the Spurs, but as I think tonight showed, and I think we'll see in future matchups between the Lakers and the Knicks, I think that would be a really competitive series that the Lakers or the Spurs could easily win if they got that far to the finals. I just think if you look at the structure of the West and the hierarchy of the West, if you're asking me which team is more likely to make the finals between the Knicks and the Lakers or the Knicks and the Spurs, it's clearly the Knicks because, I mean, the Lakers and Spurs are in the same conference as the Thunder, but then they're also in the same conference as the Nuggets and the Rockets, and there's just like a bloodbath component that you don't have to face in the East to the same degree. So I don't think the Knicks are going to win the title. I think there is a decent gap between OKC, Denver, and Houston and New York at number 4, but they could make the finals. I think like that should be the goal for this. I mean, the goal is obviously to win a championship, but I think if they don't make the finals this year, I think that's a disappointment for New York. RT Mars, thoughts on the Denver versus Houston game yesterday? I didn't get to catch the full game. I've only seen highlights, and I know there's been a lot of discourse about the refereeing. I thought it was an impressive win for Denver, and that continues to be why I think Denver's on a different tier right now. Or I think they're within the same tier with Houston, but I do think they are better than Houston, and I think they are the number 2 team in the West. But to win that game with no Gordon and no Brown, and I forget, and Peyton Watson left the game early. So like that, I mean, those are the 3 best defensive players, and for them to still win that, I think as a Rockets fan, like again, I know there was some stuff with the refereeing and both sides were upset with it, but I just think like for a Denver team that is theoretically supposed to be shaky defensively, to be missing its 3 best defenders and to still win this game, I think that's I would not feel great about that if I'm Houston, but they've had a couple of games that have been really fun, down to the wire games. I forget if they both were overtime. The first game either went to overtime or nearly went to overtime, but I think that is looking like a potential really fun second round, like 2-3 matchup. Ibrahim, do you think Jalen Brunson is the best point guard in the East? In my opinion, Cade has potential to be better, but isn't yet. Yeah, I actually like completely agree with this statement. I think Brunson is currently the best point guard in the East, but I think Cade is already like in the conversation. I think he's right there, but Brunson has done this now for multiple years, and Brunson is also. I think there's a playoff like track record component to it that carries weight for me, where, you know, like not to change the topic here, but you know, one of my big things with a guy like James Harden, right, is and this is where people look at like the numbers between James Harden and Luka Doncic and some of the similarities there, and there are certainly some similarities. And looking at the regular season numbers. And I think a big thing out there, especially with the player media, and sometimes I feel like the player media doesn't get all the nuances of the game, if I'm being completely honest here. Because if you're having a real conversation between James Harden and Luka Doncic, I think you are completely overlooking the fact that Luka Doncic is a career playoff riser and James Harden is a career playoff faller. And Zach Lowe a few years ago did an incredible breakdown of James Harden's playoff foibles, and especially in like you could go by series, but you could also go by specifically games 5s, 6s, and 7s. His productions in the first 4 games of a series versus the last 3 games of a series. There's a huge drop off there, and in general, deeper in the playoffs, and just in the playoffs in general, he has not put up close to the same numbers. Luka in several postseasons has matched or surpassed his regular season numbers and has often carried his teams to overachieve. So that's where, for me, Harden has MVP. Luka doesn't yet. Harden has a certain amount of longevity and proven like regular season success, a couple 60+ win seasons, and you know, like Harden is an offense unto himself. But ask me who I'd rather have in a 7-game series. I do not think it's close. And I think it's a pretty big gap. And point being here with Brunson versus Cade, I thought Cade had an awesome showing last postseason against Brunson and the Knicks in the first round. But Brunson has a more extensive track record. So between the two, I would lean Brunson for sure. But could Cade close that gap by the end of the season? For sure. And going into next season, like longer term, if you're asking me who I'd rather have for the next 5 years, I'd rather have Cade because there's also a bit of an age gap there. But I also think that you don't have to hide him the way that you have to try to hide Brunson, and like teams will relentlessly target Brunson in the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the 2 best point guards in the East right now, and Cade, depending on what Detroit does in the playoffs, I think like that will ultimately determine how we view him going into next season. Boji says, I'm nervous with the Lakers having 4 days off and playing the Jazz. Reminds me of a month ago when LeBron made his debut. We always play like poo with a small little break. I'm not going to lie. Like, I also think one of the tricky things, and this isn't uncommon, but the Lakers are traveling tomorrow. And I feel like sometimes like an added element is like traveling the day before with the extended break. Cause like sometimes a team will go, like the Lakers could have gone today to Utah, for example, right? And then like kind of had an extra day there and maybe practiced at a Utah college or maybe even the Utah arena and like already been in Utah. Now, because it's such a quick flight and because they have a rare break, I get why they're staying in LA and that makes sense. But I think between going there earlier versus later, going earlier, typically, I think like that has a more positive impact on like an actual road trip. So, I mean, yeah, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. I also think not having Austin is going to be a factor here where, you know, I thought LA's offense, the defense was much better. And part of that was like playing Smart more, playing Vando more, the Banshees, especially in the second half. But the offense was not as good in, and not only because they didn't have Austin in general, it was their worst 3-point shooting performance of the season. It was their third worst turnover performance of the season. So there were things that went against them offensively, but I do think part of that was not having Austin. So I think there's a chance that they have like a slow start tomorrow or kind of a weird game, but I do think, especially coming off of the momentum of the Suns win, I think they will win. RT Mars, connect to the G League. What happened? He was scoring 30 multiple times last season and is now in the G League. Did the Mark Williams trade ruin him? I don't think it ruined him, but it certainly, I think, impacted his confidence and his relationship with the organization. To your point, he did have, I want to be clear, like, he did score 30 plus points twice last season. There was the Utah game, which was incredible. I mean, that was his coming out party, 37 points, 9 threes. He had the multiple threes in, consecutively, and the crowd was going crazy. And that was a really nice moment for him last season. Then he also had the game in Denver where he had 32, did have a couple 27-point games, did have a 24-point game against Philly. So, I mean, Dalton has shown the ability to score. I think just to continue along some of the things we've talked about with him, like the defense has statistically been among the worst in the NBA. Now, part of that is a lot of the rookies last year were kind of in that mix too, but he has not really improved defensively in like a significant way to not be a glaring minus. And I just think that's like a real thing where you see teams will target him and go at him defensively. And like the scouting report is out that Dalton is a liability. And then 2, the shot has just been too inconsistent in terms of, if you look at his like monthly splits, and it's just a lot of like good shooting performance, bad shooting performance, good shooting performance, bad shooting performance. And I think he's a guy that needs to be a little bit more consistent with the shot. Like I think he has to give you a certain floor offensively that he has not quite given you to offset the defensive limitation. So I think if he was a more stable and consistent player on the offensive end, that would be one thing. But I mean, we could go through like, I think there have been some processing issues with him on both sides of the ball, and going back to last season, him like not remembering plays. You can't not remember a play, especially as I mean, that's part of a rookie learning curve to a degree, but like the amount of times it happened and the amount of times he was called out by JJ and teammates, it was just not great. So I think the Mark Williams trade certainly was an ego blow and affected him to a degree, but for whatever reason, like, he's apparently one of the hardest workers on the team. Like I'm not obviously in the gym watching each guy work out and clocking, but just stuff I hear and stuff that's been said publicly, he's like always working and always in the gym, but it just has not translated consistently at the NBA level yet. In defense of the genre, did DK get an e-bike too from Luka? Yes, he did. Everyone did. Golden asks, did Luka get you a bike too? No, he did not. I'm waiting on it. Sky Falcon 5 says, what do you make of reports the Bucks are looking to trade for Smart to keep Giannis happy? Bucks are trying to trade for Marcus Smart. This is news to me. Well, I mean, so I think I hadn't seen this. This is from Jake Fisher. I think a key here is the quote is Marcus Smart is another defensive-minded guard whom the Bucks have looked at previously, sources say, but it's difficult to see the Lakers making him available after securing Smart on a favorable deal via the buyout market and when they have their own point of attack defensive issues. So that to me is more so. It's more so sounds like he was a guy they were previously interested in. I would assume that when it became clear he was going to be available via buyout, the Bucks reached out and he chose the Lakers over the Bucks. Like he had multiple suitors, so seems like the Bucks were one of those suitors that he turned down. But I think this is This is more so the Bucks trying to telegraph that they're going for it. They're trying to be buyers instead of sellers. That's what they've been telling teams behind the scenes. But also they want like the smart archetype as a player. But the Lakers are not giving up Marcus Smart to Milwaukee unless, if they want to give up Giannis, that's a different story. But in all seriousness, like I think they'd have to give up Ryan Rollins or someone like that for it to like make any sense for LA. So I don't like the Lakers are not going to be sellers for no reason, right? Like, and that's also the flip side of like sometimes when I get the fake trades for like Orlando, or Orlando's a popular fake trade team, or Houston or whoever. It's like, why would Houston or Orlando give up rotation guys and make their team worse when they're trying to go for it? Same thing for the Lakers here. Like this is the inverse of that, where the Lakers are not just going to give the Bucks Marcus Smart. That doesn't make any sense. Boji says, I think I saw the Bucks might be interested in Jeremy Grant. That one's a little interesting, and I would assume that's like a Kuzma Grant thing. I probably would rather have Grant in a vacuum. Now the contract is what's tough, and that's where that the Bucks are just doubling down on the bad money. They can't help themselves. Lakers are goated, says, can't lie. As a LeBron fan, I'm disappointed in how slow his ramp up has been. I get it. He's 40. I get you. Look, like he is playing better. And I think, the defense and the turnovers, like that part reminds me of last season. I thought that the start of last season, where like the beginning of last season, remember LeBron had like several stretches of just like really bad turnover games and 5, 6, 7 turnover games. And then the defense was really subpar to start the season. And the shot wasn't quite there either. That's kind of like, if we're comparing it to last season, we'd still be in like the mid-November part of the LeBron ramp up, or maybe like early to mid-November. So I still think he didn't really turn things around in terms of like really looking like the all-NBA, all-star level player that he became until like early to mid-December. So I still think we're a couple weeks away from him stabilizing as a more consistent, like high-end all-star type player. But I get you. I understand why it has been disappointing or frustrating, but I think he's too great and too proven, in my opinion, for it to not turn around. Now, if we're having the same conversation a month from now, if we're having the same conversation a month and a half from now, then, that's a different conversation at that time in terms of like, that's probably just the reality at that point, and maybe it's not turning around. But for now, I remain optimistic. Angelo Torres, Jovan, if you had to cover an East team, where and who would you want to watch or be? I'd cover the Knicks just because I'm a big city guy. New York is my favorite city, second favorite city in the U.S. behind LA. So if I had to move to the East, if I had to cover a non-LA team or, not cover the Lakers, I would cover the Knicks. BC says, for me, it's Orlando, fun city. You might need to take me out in Orlando because I haven't had a lot of. Oh, BC also says Miami. Like, so it would be between New York and Miami. I do really like Miami as well, but I am a big market truther. I do like the big. The big markets in big cities. Is it Muad? Hope I didn't butcher that too bad. Hey, Jovan, big fan. I'm a Moroccan living in Paris. Love your content. Shout out to Paris. That is, I just mentioned LA is my favorite city in the US. Paris is my favorite city straight up. Paris is my favorite city in the world. And That's where I got engaged to my wife. So shout out to Paris. I proposed in front of the Eiffel Tower. Cliche romantic, but it was epic. Love your content. Thank you. What do you think of Luka, AR, Herb, Dort, Ayton lineup for next year? Big LeBron fan, but you have to choose between him and AR. The Lakers could swing Herb and Dort. I would love that. I would quickly say this group is a little bit on the small side in terms of, I think, the rim protection and the defensive rebounding here. Like Luka's a really good defensive rebounder. Ayton's obviously a good defensive rebounder. AR's a good rebounder for a guard, but between AR, Herb, and Dort, it's not like your 3 through 5 spots in the rotation in terms of like the rebounding, right? If we're saying Luka and Ayton are like the two fulcrums of the rebounding, and then spots 3, 4, 5 are some combination of AR, Herb, and Dort, I think that's a little bit small and would struggle a little bit on the defensive glass and with rim protection. But in terms of perimeter defense, obviously, upgrading from Rui and LeBron to Herb and Dort is about as stark of a perimeter defense upgrade as is possible. So that would be completely different. And maybe the Lakers aren't the best rim protection or defensive rebounding team, but they can wreak absolute havoc with Herb and Dort, maybe Marcus Smart and Jake LaRavia, likely still under contract, Jake will be Marcus, depends on where his season goes, but let's just say hypothetically, and Vando will still be under contract. So you could have a situation where you have Herb and Dort as your two starting wing defenders, and then you have Smart, LaRavia, and Vando off the bench. Like, that is a totally different makeup of this group in terms of how they look defensively. And then if you can add maybe another like quality point guard defender off the bench, and then, another shooter or something, like you're really cooking with something there, I think, in terms of like a two-way balance to the rotation. So I like that lineup. Again, I think like the immediate thing that jumps out, a little bit of the shooting, right, between Herb and Dort. I think both guys are better shooters than their reputations, but beggars can't be choosers, and the Lakers do need an infusion of 3-and-D talent in perimeter defense. And Herb as a potential trade target, and then Dort as a potential casualty there in OKC based on their financial situation. If you could somehow swing both those guys, I think that's a home run. Trucker, thank you for the super chat. Remember the one time you said Rui is better than Grant before the season started? A huge bad take from someone so eloquent like you, Jovan. I might still stand by that. Certainly, I would say I'd rather have Rui on his contract than Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant, for as nice of a bounce back season as he's had, is still... it's also tough. Grant's getting 14 shots a game. Rui's getting, 13.6. Rui's getting 9.6. From an efficiency standpoint, Rui is shooting nearly 10% better from the floor, nearly 7% better on threes, nearly 10% better on twos. Rui is averaging 3 more minutes, but Rui's averaging more rebounds. Slightly, it's very close. Grant is a better passer. Grant's a better defender. Grant is averaging 20 points per game, but I do think if you swap these two, their numbers would flip, where I think Rui, with a larger offensive role in Portland, his efficiency would inevitably take a bit of a nosedive, just because part of Rui's efficiency right now, of course, is like he's just an elite shooter and very efficient, but part of it is like the volume is still relatively low, where naturally for any shooter, the more volume, the more attempts, your efficiency is going to drop by some, measure. But I don't know if Rui could average 20, because Jeremy Grant has a proven track record of multiple years of being a 20 plus per game scorer. Really looking at it, including now this year, in 5 of his past 6 seasons, he's been at 19 plus points per game. I think the big difference between Rui and Jeremy Grant is the contract, right? So Rui's an expiring, and I think he'll be somewhere in that $18 to $22 million range next season, and probably sign a multi-year deal either with the Lakers or someone else. But Jeremy Grant's making $32 million this year, 34 next year, 36. So like that's an overpay. Jeremy Grant is not, like, even with his uptick in scoring, the efficiency is not, he's shooting the ball well from 3, but the efficiency on his 2s is below average. And like, you know, I think there's a limitation to, we've seen like when Jeremy Grant is a good scorer on your, or a prominent scorer on your team's usually pretty bad. So I still stand by that. I think Rui is, I think I would also posit this. Rui was better than Grant last season. So based on Grant having a down year, Rui, I think, did take a step up last season, and the contract, Rui was better than Grant last season. Now, Grant is having an awesome bounce back year overall and is having, you know, definitely better year than last year. I think, you know, pretty similar to like a couple years ago. So, I mean, if you wanted to argue Grant's the better player, I'm not going to like fight you on it. I think it's close. I would probably lean Rui, but I think, is Grant worth nearly double the price of Rui? I don't think so. Even if you want to say Grant's better, Rui at 18 versus Grant at 32, I think it's clearly Rui. Ellen Leifer says, Toronto, great city, 25. I love Toronto. Toronto's up there for me. It's probably in my top 5. That's where I have my bachelor parties. So, you know, you don't have to convince me on the 6. That's my spot. Trucker says contract bad, but Grant does more than just scoring. I mean, that's a fair counter. Like, I'll say this: Grant is a better defender than Rui, and to your point, is also a better passer than Rui, and does contribute in more ways than Rui. So, anytime I'm talking about a play, like, you know, I like part of the whole Grant Rui conversation was like a couple years ago. The take that I have since owned was like this was going into, I guess, Rui's second season with the Lakers, right? Because he had a half, I guess, like his first full season with the Lakers, but like he got obviously traded in January, so he had the half season. I was of the mindset that the Lakers should trade Rui for Jeremy Grant, and I was even willing to attach. At one point, I even said, I think I said 2 first. That this is me like owning how bad of a take that was, but especially I was like, I would do 1 first for sure. If the Blazers really demand, because the Blazers wanted 2, I was like, if the Blazers really held strong at 2, I would consider it. But like 1 for sure, like Rui in a first, yes, give me Jeremy Grant. He's that much better than Rui. I think Rui has closed that gap. And then you also factor in the contract difference. That's where I think I had shifted going back to like the summer of Grant had a down year. That contract was looking even worse than it is right now. And yeah, so I think if we're looking at them in a vacuum, you could argue for Grant being the better player. And I do agree that he's a more versatile player who does more. The issue is like these things aren't in a vacuum, and the contract does matter. And again, I don't, even if you want to argue Grant's better, I don't think there's a $14 million difference between the two. And that's a pretty big difference. Nala says, any possible buyout guys to keep an eye on? Chris Paul? Not that I've heard. Looking at, if we look at some of these teams here, I mean, the weird thing right now is that a lot of the teams that are underachieving, like, don't necessarily want to be underachieving, other than, I think, like Washington, Indiana, and Brooklyn have accepted their fate. And I've talked about it before. Indiana is just in a gap year right now until Tyrese Haliburton returns. But especially in the West, like New Orleans did the Derek Queen trade in part to like hopefully be a playoff or play-in team. The Clippers were expecting to be a home court team and like a contender. The Kings delusionally thought they could be a play-in team. Dallas had high expectations. Portland started the season off strong and has since fallen off. So like I think we're in a weird spot right now where a lot of the teams that are underachieving or like theoretically should be buyout candidate teams in terms of like buying out their own players are all still kind of trying to go for it. Like I guess Sacramento and New Orleans, I think at some point are going to have to swallow the tough pill of just their season is going nowhere. The Clippers are 4.5 games out of the 10 seed. So like, I mean, they're going to have to go on a run here soon if they're going to try to make that up. But Utah's the 10 seed right now. They owe a top 8 protected pick to OKC. So Utah probably is going to have to tank at some point here coming up to secure them retaining their pick. But then, you know, Portland's right there. Dallas is playing better. So yeah, I mean, the Clippers are in a really tough spot. So maybe the Clippers. I mean, Chris Paul is the obvious one, but no real, like I would say that you got to look at the lottery teams, but maybe, I don't know. No one off the top of my head right now. Ray says, are the Lakers away next game or home? Lakers are on the road for the next 3 games. So they got at Utah Thursday, at the Clippers on Saturday, at Phoenix on Tuesday, and they're back Thursday on Christmas Day against Houston at home. Mario asked if I got a bike from Luca. I did not. The only media members who did were the actual team media members in Trudell, Michael Thompson, Bill McDonald, and Stu Lance. So all those guys are technically Lakers employees. So they are, you know, part of their check is from the Lakers, or, you know, technically it's Spectrum, but they got the partnership with the Lakers. So like they're a Laker employee, although Trudell is actually a Laker employee because he also is the team's like official reporter and he writes for .com. So no, I long story short, no, I did not get a bike. Coco asked, dream trade to make the Lakers a serious contender. I think my 2 favorite, like kind of, this could be a 3-team trade or it could be 2 separate trades, but I'm not quite sure what gets sent out. I would be willing to send out basically every tradable thing other than like the obvious pieces not being traded out. But some form of 2 separate deals or a 3-team trade where the Lakers get back Herb Jones, Sadiq Bey, and Keon Ellis. I think if you added Herb Jones as the 5th starter and Sadiq Bey and Keon Ellis to the bench, that dramatically changes the dynamic of the team. I would assume Gabe, Maxey, Dalton, the 1st, the 2nd, and at least a couple of pick swaps are going out. But I would do that in a heartbeat. You know, it gets a little trickier if Rui has to be involved or if Adu has to be involved. That's where it gets a little trickier for me in terms of my willingness to do that. But if you could keep Rui, if you could add those 3 players, move Rui to a bench role, and have like a key bench group of Rui, Smart, Sadiq Bey, and Keon Ellis and Jackson, like if that's your top 10, now I think, you know, you got the starters with Herb being like the ideal or close to the ideal 5th guy. Then you have Rui as a 6th man, which I think is a proper slotting of him on this team. You have Marcus still in the bench role. You've swapped Gabe for Keon Ellis. You've swapped, I guess, Jake. You know, you could maybe even do matchup base between Jake and Sadiq in terms of like who makes more sense. And you still have Jackson. Like that to me is a really solid 10 to 11 man rotation that, again, no one's going to be put. I've said this before. Like no one is going to make an on paper move that puts them on the same level as OKC, but I think that would easily put the Lakers right at or above Denver and Houston, if they're not already there. But like, I think it's fair to argue they're not just based on their statistical profile. But that to me would probably put the Lakers as the number 2 team in the West. Is it Luis? says, what would it take to get Mann and Highsmith? I don't think, not a first. This is kind of a tricky one where you could probably get that combination for 2 or 3 seconds. The issue right now is the Lakers don't have 2 or 3 seconds. Now maybe they could do a smaller move to, like, could you flip Dalton somewhere for a couple seconds and then add that into this trade? Maybe. But the thing with Mann is he's got 2 more years left. So if I'm taking on Mann, I'd probably want to send out Vando just to get off of that money. I know he had the game against Phoenix, and we'll see how the role continues to grow and how he continues to produce. But I still think up to this point, he has not produced at the level of his contract, and I'm still a bit skeptical like that he will be able. Maybe this year he can, but like he still has 2 more years left. He does have an injury history, and if there was a way to get out of that deal, I would want to. Now, Mann has the same amount of years left as him, but Mann's making more money, so that's a factor that you have to factor in. Of like, do you want to take on the additional money? But maybe if you are taking on the additional money and you're saying, hey, we're swapping Vando out for Mann, but we're taking on that extra money, you can get away with maybe adding like a second. Just 1 second, or maybe a second in the whole deal, depending on, again, like what is it like Kleba and Vando and a second or a couple seconds for Mann and Highsmith, something like that. Like that's kind of interesting. I'm not quite sure if the math works off the top of my head. I'm looking up Highsmith's contract right now. I've thought, so he's making 5.6. So you add in Mann, that gets you to about 20. So yeah, I mean, I guess Lakers could do Gabe and Maxey, or Gabe and Vando, or Vando and Maxey. I would prefer Maxey be one of the guys, and then you could debate Vando versus Gabe. I think if you could get out of the Vando long-term contract, I would look to do that, but maybe the price gets a little too high. But I would not give up a first for these 2 guys, or like, the combination. A second might not be enough for the Brooklyn side, but again, maybe if you're just helping them have relief. I think the one thing is I don't think I'd want to take on Mann. If say it was like Maxey and Gabe, now you're keeping the Vando contract and you're adding the Mann contract long term. I think that's a little tricky. So I think I'd only want Mann if I'm getting rid of Vando to like, you still are technically taking on extra money each of the next 2 years, but it's offset by getting off Vando's contract. I would rather have like the additional salary flexibility and additional roster spot rather than having both those guys. And now it's like in your pecking order, you got Mann at 16, Vando at 11. I don't want to pay those guys a combined $27 million. I don't think that makes sense. Sky Falcon asks if I saw the clip of the fan telling Herb he's a Laker in his reaction. I did. That was hilarious. Brad Stevens, GM. Do you think like Luka will ask to be traded if the Lakers keep wasting his prime? No. I mean, sure. If we're 5 years from now and the Lakers have lost in the first round every year, like maybe that's a different conversation. But Luka extended. He didn't have to extend. He's happy. He wants to be a Laker. He just got everybody e-bikes. He's in the MVP mix. The Lakers are a top 4 team in the West. I don't see Luka asking out. Nala, outside of Rui's contract, does he even have value given he's on expiring? Yes, I do. Like, I would say that in my conversations with people about Rui, he is a little bit more of like a polarizing player in terms of some people are higher on him, some people are lower on him. I mean, that's not uncommon for most players. You're going to survey 4, 5, 6 people. You're going to get 4, 5, 6 perspectives, or at least like 2 or 3 perspectives, right? Some people think Rui's a starting level guy. Some people think Rui's a bench guy. Some people are higher on his defense. Some people are lower on his defense. I think everyone acknowledges like the shooting and just like the overall, like that's a valuable skill set with that size, and he has been successful with the Lakers like overall. But yeah, I mean, I think the concern with potentially trading for Rui is just that he's extension eligible by June 30th, and he's an impending free agent. So it depends like what your motive is, right? Like if you're, let's just say hypothetically, I don't think the Lakers are going to trade Rui for Terrence Mann, but like, let's just say that was a possibility that both sides were interested in this hypothetical, which again, to be clear, Rui's a better player and it doesn't make sense. From the Brooklyn side, you are saying, hey, we want to get off Terrence Mann's contract. Let's take on Rui as an expiring and just get out of the Terrence Mann business and keep our cap sheet clean. If you're the Lakers, you're saying, hey, maybe we think Terrence Mann fits better long-term. We're willing to take on like the extra years to kind of just like have a locked-in player. Like I could see, it just depends what a team wants, right? Like if you are trading for Rui to actually be a longer-term piece, then that's a whole other conversation where now you either have to re-sign him or extend him, and you got to figure out what that number is. And maybe he just wants to test free agency and doesn't want to commit to anybody. Like, I mean, that's another factor here that I feel like people don't realize as well with the expirings is like, if I was Rui and the Lakers traded me, or if I was Austin and the Lakers traded me, I'm not committing to the team I get traded to. I'm going to be like you're probably in kind of like a negative, like, especially getting traded from the Lakers, traded out of LA, traded out of the spotlight. You're probably in kind of like a dark place. You're probably in like not the best headspace. And my attitude would be like, well, like, the Lakers didn't want me or whatever. Like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to ball out the rest of the year. And then I'm going to go test free agency and get the most money possible I can get. And I would not necessarily have like loyal, like you're not in like the most loyal mood necessarily when you get traded to a new situation. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Rui and whether the Lakers end up trading. I mean, I don't think they want to trade him. I don't think they're going to try to trade him. I do think that if it came down to a certain player and that really costing Rui, I think for certain players, they would consider it. But if they don't trade him, then it becomes a whole conversation of, do you extend him and like, how does he fit into your long-term vision? Because if you are going to potentially just let him walk, you could argue it makes more sense to just trade, like, if like, let's say Herb Jones, if the Pelicans want Rui and they're like, hey, we actually like Rui next to Derek Queen as a shooter, or, you're shooting four, okay, like then I think you have to really consider that if you're the Lakers, unless you're like gung-ho on re-signing him or extending him, and then that's a different conversation. But if you're unsure and you want to see more of a sample size, come trade season, I think I mean, which we're already here, you do have to strongly consider it. All right, going to go about, I will go to an hour 30, so we got 10 more minutes here. White Falcon Love says, any contending teams who might actually consider Rui to be a starter on their roster? And I mean, I wouldn't judge it just through that lens, because I think Rui makes more sense on like a younger playoff team than a because I mean, if we go through it, like he's not starting on OKC. They have their front line of Hartenstein, Chet, J-Dub. He's not starting on Denver. They have Jokic, Gordon, Johnson. He actually would make some sense on San Antonio in the Harrison Barnes role as an upgrade over Harrison Barnes. I do think Harrison Barnes is a slightly better defender and does play with generally more physicality. And he's a lights out corner 3-point shooter, as JJ noted, ahead of the Spurs, or actually after the Spurs matchup. Harrison Barnes has been the best corner 3-point shooter over the past 2 seasons. But like Rui that's actually not a bad comparison to Rui in I think several ways is Harrison Barnes, and Rui is like I think could be like the torchbearer for Harrison Barnes in San Antonio. Like, both came in as these like athletic tweener forwards. Harrison Barnes had way more buzz and, pedigree and sort of like upside, but both guys have had like dealt with motor questions earlier in their careers. And then I think both guys have stabilized into being like stretch fours who can defend multiple positions, but like, I think their defense is more in theory than in actuality. But they're like lights out shooters who really can help an offense and like function in a certain role. So I actually, that one's interesting. He wouldn't start in Houston. He wouldn't start in Minnesota. Phoenix is interesting. The fully formed Phoenix team I don't know. Phoenix is interesting. That's borderline. And then I don't think he starts in Golden State. So, I mean, I already went into the non-contender group because I don't have Phoenix and Golden State in the contender group. Maybe he starts in Detroit. I think he's better than Tobias Harris, depending on how Detroit wants to do their starting group. He does not start in New York. He does not start in Toronto. I don't think he starts in Boston. He doesn't start in Orlando. I don't think he starts in Philly's borderline, but like Paul George is such a name that maybe he starts in Philly. I don't know. That one's close. And then he doesn't start. I don't think he starts in Cleveland. So yeah, I mean that's my take on each of those teams. I see Chuck Dangler, aka Fang Charlie, sent a super chat. I missed it. Who has the nicest shot form on LA? I watched DK's highlights and it seemed like his release is slow. Maybe AR because I saw it IRL. I mean, Dalton does have really good form. It is a little bit slow. I mean, Rui's got really good form as well. LeBron has improved his form. I mean, Jackson Hayes had the one pick and pop three. I would say from like a pure form perspective, I think Dalton and Rui have the two nicest shots just in terms of like aesthetics. When you like now Luka, especially when he's hitting the step back, that's just a thing of beauty of like his like balance leaning back and just like his form. And I'm not even going to try and do it because I'm not going to do it justice, but like Luka's form on the step back and specifically is special. Austin does have a good shot, and I think he's gotten the shot, like the form has been quicker. I think in general, I guess I'd probably say Rui has the best mechanics, and that like, because one thing with Rui that I think is really impressive is like if you Rui, there's like a level of consistency with Rui's form that I think that's partly why he's such a like, and of course that's part of what makes great shooters. But even a guy like Steph, you'll see like Steph can alter his shot a bit, and he is such a special shooter that it almost doesn't matter. But like Rui is able to almost in like a robotic way that's what makes Rui such a special shooter. He just has this like repetitive kind of process with his form that I think, and it repeats in the mid range. It's also obviously, beyond the arc. So I would say Rui, but I think Dalton is in the mix, at least from like a form perspective. I do agree it can be on a little bit slower than you'd want. And then LeBron has really improved his form. And I think, obviously not this season. We're not seeing the results yet, but has the last couple of years been one of arguably LA's best shooter or in that, I guess Rui technically, but LeBron on like a higher volume. And then Austin. Yeah. So I would say Rui though, that would be my pick. RT Mars says, I'm taking Gabe. Well, yeah, you could argue that. Like Gabe does have a nice shot. It's just there's a little bit. he airballs or like misses long a lot, like too much for my liking. I know we're not saying like who's the best shooter, but I feel like that there's like a little bit of an erratic nature to Gabe's shooting. It like Brad Stevens GM noting, Gabe's shot is quick. I mean, if we're judging who has the quickest shot, then yeah, Gabe is in that mix. I think Rui's got a pretty shot, but PJ says, Jovan Dalton got 30 points tonight in the G League. I will be watching some film on that later. I appreciate the heads up. I saw he had that big dunk, but I think this is good for Dalton, right? Like I don't want to like overreact and say like this changes everything with Dalton or like this makes like this huge difference. But I think for a guy who hasn't been getting consistent run and who has not been seeing the ball fall through the basket as often as he did last season, to an earlier question, like I think Dalton getting some G League reps, as humbling as it might be on some level, it is nice for him and I think could help propel his season in a different direction. Emmy says, can Clay be an option? He's been playing better. I think in general, it's going to be tough to trade with the Mavericks. And if you do, I would want, there's several, I'd rather have Daniel Gafford. I'd rather have PJ Washington. I'd rather have Max Christie. I'd probably even rather have Najee Marshall, though, that's debatable. I think my one thing with Clay, to your point, he has been shooting the ball better. If you look at 4 of his last 5 games, he's been at 42% or more, 3+ threes in 4 of his last 5 games. I think the one area that his game has not fully clicked back in has been the defensive end. I just don't think Clay has been the same level of defender going on. I mean, really since he returned from injury, but even like compared to the title year or like 2023, I think the last couple of years there's been a real drop off on that end. So I almost view this is going to sound blasphemous because you could argue, I would argue that Clay might be the best straight up 3-and-D player in the league. And that feels like it's reductive. That feels like it's diminishing who he was a star level 3-and-D player, right? And he could have done more offensively and he bought into a certain role, but like that was Clay's role, was literally, go score 62, taking fewer than 10 dribbles the entire game, right? Like he was that dude who ultimate laser off the ball, flying off pin downs, flying off floppy action, trailing into threes, spot up shooting in the corners. And then defensively, he's hounding your point guard 94 feet. Ultimate option there. Danny Green on steroids. Just like that. When they would talk about 3-and-D, I think Klay Thompson should be the model because he did 3-and-D at a like superstar level, which is just pretty wild. But I say all this to say, I think Clay's is kind of in like the Rui level of defense. And that's where if like, I would not be bringing him in to be a 3-and-D option. If you're bringing him in to be like a bench shooter, that's like one thing, but he's a minus defensively now. And he is no longer capable of really he's kind of a 4 defensively now in terms of his like optimal use. So that's kind of my like, and that's to say nothing of the actual contract where the contract isn't good for Clay. It's not horrible. It's actually 60.7, then 17.5. It's not like terrible, but it's not great. All right, going. I just hit the 130 mark, but I'll answer like another question or two. Brad Stevens says, what are your thoughts on Jordan Goodwin? I love Jordan Goodwin. I think he's more of a back-end rotation player on a good team, but a valuable back-end rotation player. Like, I think if he were on the Lakers, outside of Smart and Hayes, who I think are locked in as like two really solid bench players who pretty much play their role every single night. I think Goodwin versus LaRavia versus Gabe, and I mentioned LaRavia and Gabe because those have been two of the guys who play every single night and have a certain role. I think that's a real conversation, in my opinion, up to this point. Like Jordan Goodwin is a banshee. He's cutting, he's crashing, he's diving on the ground for loose balls, he's picking up 94 feet, he's switching across multiple positions. I think you could argue, especially factoring in the contract, I'd rather have him than Gabe. You could even put the contracts aside and just say straight up, I think it's pretty close, and I might even lean Goodwin. So I think it's unfortunate that LA had to, like, I get why they'd rather have a Dalton or an Adu, but like for this year, I think he would help more than those two guys, and I think he would also help potentially more than, you know, Jake has a size advantage that, like, I do believe in the Lakers playing a little bit bigger and like having a baseline level of size. So I do view Goodwin as more competition for Gabe, and he's also bigger than Gabe and less exploitable defensively than Gabe. So yeah, I really like Jordan Goodwin. I think he's a winner. And it's going to come down to what the Kings' price is going to be, and, you know, if they're willing to trade him or if they're willing to trade him to the Lakers. But yeah, he checks the box. I think LA is looking for some bigger fish as well, including a Herb Jones type. And they're also weighing whether they want to even trade that first round pick or not, and just what their options are. But yeah, Keon Ellis is probably a top 2 or 3 3-and-D option right now on the market, which, to be clear, is more of a commentary on the state of the market right now, right? Like, if he's a top 2 or 3, I like Keon Ellis. If he's a top 2 or 3 option, that kind of shows you where the market's at right now. And then final one here, Keon Park, another super chat. Thank you. It's a $20+ million player. Would you prefer a 2-3 guard or a 3-4 wing? Trevor talked about smart trade. Is smart trade real talk? Talked about the smart thing before. My understanding, I mean, that's coming from the Milwaukee. Let's be clear here. That's coming from the Milwaukee side. Milwaukee is trying to do damage control right now. They're trying to put out that they're buyers, that they are trying to keep Giannis. They're trying to build around Giannis. My understanding of the situation is that they were previously interested in Smart, and they'd love to trade for Smart, but the Lakers are not trading like that was clearly a Milwaukee side of the thing. The Lakers are not trading Marcus Smart. Like, I'm not saying they're not I think there are scenarios in which he could be traded, but what is Milwaukee? Like, the Lakers aren't just gift wrapping Marcus Smart to Milwaukee. That would make zero sense. So in terms of the $20 million player, for Gabe, I guess I don't even know why I'm thinking about this. I would prefer the 2-3 guard, just because I think that's right now the weak point in LA's defensive makeup. I think they have, but like, I think LeBron, Luka, and Rui all defend best at the 4. Vando and Marcus also, I think, both defend well up or defend better up. I think the weak spot right now is I don't trust anyone other than Vando, but I also think that Vando still is going to be pigeonholed into a certain smaller role, that I don't really trust anyone as that point of attack guy against like the speedy, quick, athletic guards. Like when you're playing San Antonio, someone who could guard Fox, switch on to Castle, switch on to Harper, keep them in front of you. Here, I'm bringing it all full circle with Spurs Knicks, who can keep them in front of you and, you know, switch across those multiple positions and not give up any ground. Smart is the closest. I mentioned Vando. Maybe Smart's technically the closest. Like, I did think he defended Fox reasonably well in that game, but historically, and I would even argue this season, Smart, I think I've liked him more against like 3s and even some 4s compared to him on 1s and 2s, because he's just not as quick as he used to be. So I would say the 2-3 guard is the position I'm targeting if I'm the Lakers, not really the 3-4 wing. I don't think they need another 4. I think they have too many 4s. I think it needs to be a 1-3. So whether that's like a 1-3 wing or a 1-3 guard, however you want to delineate that, that's what I think they need. But with all that said, I'm going to wrap here. Appreciate you guys for rocking with me. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download it, leave a 5-star review. I will likely be back tomorrow with a post-practice report. There wasn't really much to talk about today, and I also decided to do this post-game reaction, so I pushed the Q&A to later in the day, but likely be back sometime tomorrow afternoon or evening. If not, for sure, we'll be back Thursday with Lakers Collective at 11 a.m. And then, of course, post-game reaction after Lakers Jazz. But I'm leaning toward going tomorrow, assuming we get some news and updates coming out of practice. But appreciate you all. Appreciate the late night gang. Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Block and for listening to my Knicks-Spurs breakdown. If you missed that, talked about it the opening 30 minutes of the show. You can check it out after I wrap here. But appreciate you all and talk to you all soon.